That's great. All right. I believe that we are live. It says it's setting up our webinar. Thanks everyone for joining another episode. Great. There we go. Of the OpenJS Foundation's Cross Project Council meeting. Today is the 8th of November. I'll drop the recording link into the notes here. And we can get started. Any announcements from anyone about anything? No? Wow.
Well, just the team, the OpenJS team, Luke's sitting next to me, Kylie's across the table. We are in Tahoe, California for the Linux Foundation Member Summit. So it's essentially anyone who's a Linux Foundation member sends representatives as well as board members. So a good opportunity for us to learn what's happening across the LF organization.
That's great.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
Yep.
So if we anything from the board or anything else we want to share before we get into the agenda? Anything else to talk about?
We had our board meeting yesterday. We and an audit and finance committee meeting. We still have a little bit of noodling to do before we approve our 2023 budget, but everything seems to be going on track. It's a lot of work kind of pulling those things together and just sort of doing a true up from how much we, tracked from last year. So we'll probably vote on that in our December 2nd board meeting, just making a few kind of adjustments here and there.
Okay.
But yep.
Great.
Oh, good.
Cool.
Mm-hmm.
Toby, you added this at the top of the list. So should we start with talking about issue labels and creating a dedicated project?
Yeah, sure. So this is just a proposal, and I sort of like built a bit of it so we could have a better feel of what it looked like. Essentially, I'm struggling to figure out like what's on our plate. That's like the number one problem. And the number two problem is that we have sort of like these issues that keep showing up and that we keep discussing on a regular basis. Although we sort of have an agreement on what the conclusion is, the conclusion just needs to be done. But we sort of like have the whole conversation over and over every, sort of like 6 weeks or something. And sometimes every other week. And so essentially the idea was, twofold. One was, can we create a CPC meeting label for all of the open meetings that we have that haven't been closed yet, so we can filter them out really easily? So I did that, which is really nice because you can literally just see all of the other issues, right? That we actually have to work on. And then once I got to see the other issues, it's like the batch is a lot smaller, right? And there's like a number of them, which essentially, as I was saying, have a decision to have been made, or like waiting on either the board or the staff or to do something, right? And once we have those listed, it gets much clearer to understand exactly what we need to be working on. And so the idea was, let's clean things up a bit and have a better sense of that. And following that, sort of like if folks have a look at this and it makes sense and they're happy with it, and this is a proposal, right? Following that, the idea would be, can we create a project? I haven't used a new GitHub project sort of like boards. The old one was good enough to actually like have a better sense of what work was getting done. So I haven't tried the new one, but would folks be okay creating a new one so we can have a better sense of like where the projects and pull requests, like what kind of stuff we have, and have a better view of like our work, essentially. That's the idea.
Yeah, I don't have any objections other than, will managing the board be creating more work? Maybe not.
So my understanding is the new stuff can be essentially driven by labels. And so it's essentially like they move to the right places depending on what label you have on them.
Okay. I'm open to trying it. I love, organizational admin kind of stuff.
So I'm happy to try to set it up. And if it doesn't work, we just don't use it, right? And we just remove it.
Yeah, sounds good. Cool, I like it.
What's the tool called? It's under
Well, it's
it's in a GitHub. It's a GitHub.
Yeah, it's just like the fourth or fifth. It's projects.
Yeah, it's
It's like the
basically
fourth-
having like
yeah.
the swim lanes for your stuff, and then they
Just, okay, so but not creating a whole new thing, just a new
Oh
tag.
no,
yeah.
yeah, it's a new tab. It's already in GitHub. We can just create a
Got it.
project there.
Okay, new tag.
It's essentially a Kanban board that combines all of your issues and all of the requests, the pull requests,
Into
either
one.
across a project or a whole organization.
Okay.
And it's just very practical to have just a better view of like work that actually needs to be done.
Mm-hmm.
And if people hate it, like if people are cool with me trying that out, and we can have a look at it in 2 weeks, and if everyone hates it, we can just delete it.
I'm totally open to it. Sounds
Okay,
good.
I'll do it then. Thanks.
Cool. Yeah, and on that note too, I started to clean up some of the meeting issues, but I still have a lot of work to do there. So I'm gonna try to get those done soon. That'll at least clear out a bunch of the noise that's in the repo. So yeah, soon. Thank you,
We have
Toby.
some cleanup. We have
Go ahead.
cleanup to do on some mailing list as well. We have a few different sources across the LF, and I was looking at one. I'm like, okay, it shows Christian still at Sauce Labs. I'm like, he hasn't been there forever for his email. So I'm like trying to figure out what's the source of truth, and we have some cleanup to do. Some of it might require your help if you update your Linux Foundation IDs, but we're going to be coming back to you with that, because the one thing since when we were sort of without a PM, I sort of got in the weeds on some of these things, and some of it's a little messy. So
Yeah, I can imagine.
Mhm.
All right, cool. Well, keep us posted and let me know how I can help.
Awesome.
Great. So that's all good stuff. Moving on to the agenda items here. The first issue is 953. This is funding for project-driven initiatives. I'm not sure where we are with this and what's been determined. I know we've had some good conversations, but does anybody have anything?
Yeah, Mateo and Sarah brought this to the board meeting yesterday. Mateo couldn't make the board meeting because it was late in the afternoon, so time zone didn't work. But we had a prep call with him. We took a bunch of notes. I think the bottom line is the board is open. And again, we're still working out the budget, but I'm going to sort of summarize some of that feedback, share some of that feedback with Mateo again, and then we'll update the issue. So.
Okay. All right, great. So I won't do anything in the issue yet. I'll wait until that
Yeah.
comes back. All right, cool, great.
I took the action to summarize, update, and then to concisely write that up in the issue for y'all.
Oh, great, thank you.
But yeah, that was just a last night board meeting, so I've got some work to do.
Cool. And thanks to whoever's helping take notes. I appreciate that.
One thing I might add, just as a not directly related, but semi-related, is I did submit an LFX crowdfunding account for Node.js for collecting the bug bounties, which was another thing we kind of discussed in this context. So I'm just waiting for that to be approved, just as a related item. That's
Okay,
it.
great. Is that something the LF staff approves, Robin? I'm guessing.
Yeah, there's a process and an engine behind that. Michael, did you get what you needed? If not, then we can.
I'm just waiting. It basically said, like, you'll hear typically, it says maximum 5 days, which I don't think it's been yet, sometimes
Okay.
within 24 hours. So I'm just waiting to
Yeah.
hear the approval or not. And I think
You
it's
opened
just
a
like,
ticket, right? Yeah.
well, I'd opened a ticket. Now I actually did the application, and my ticket, I was
Okay.
asking about, like, can we actually have an organization versus just an individual's? And the answer is you can only have individual Linux Foundation accounts. So I created one for the TSC named like LFX. I forget what I called it, but like a specific one for this crowdfunding account. And if we use the same kind of model for this project driven funding, which I think is what we talked about, we'd have to create like additional accounts and Linux Foundation users for each of those accounts, I think.
Yeah, my understanding with LFX funding accounts, you need to have a known person who is not an LF employee be the approver on things. I'll mention it to the team here this week at our LF event just to see if we can have just a TSC. I just don't want to get it bounced back and then you have to wait again.
See, the part that confused me is like, it only seemed like, basically it didn't sound like there was going to be any org associated with any account. So it seemed like there was one LFX account associated with the crowdfunding account, and they might have to do everything. I don't know, but like,
Okay.
which sounds a little bit different from what you're saying. If it's like somebody could
Yeah.
create the account, but then somebody else is approving them. I don't know. Maybe once the
Let me,
account's open.
this will be our first, so I'll
Yeah.
figure it out. We'll figure it out. We'll learn together.
That's what I figured out why I'd mention it. It's a
Yeah.
We'll figure out the ins and outs of how we would run one of these in this first one, and then it'd probably be easier for the next ones if we do get them up
Yep.
for these project funded ones.
Cool. Great. I will move on if there's nothing more on this one. The next item on the agenda is issue 923. This is clarified voting process. This is a placeholder issue to drop things in for our voting and election areas of improvement, I guess I'll say. I don't know, do we want to keep this on the agenda? Do we want to just try to have a working session where we kind of work through some of these things? What are people's thoughts about this issue? Nothing.
We should have a better documented version of what we do from a tooling to a process. So we should chase that down, Luke. There's got to be something from Jory and Brian, I think, in the notes or in the GitHub repo already.
Toby?
Yeah, I mean, if I remember well, now it might be confusing this issue with another one, but I think part of it was clarifying the process, but another part of it was also making sure that we had a better sense of better time. I mean, there's a voting process on one side, but then there's a whole sort of like election process, and making sure that we had a better sense of why people were showing up and sort of like what their goals were. And so I think it's this issue, but I'm not sure.
I think you're right. And we had talked about why are we limited in the number of reps from projects, for example, because that was developed when the two foundations merged together. Like, why would not every project have a rep? So were we looking at it, expanding that scope that way? Because if you look, we don't vote very often, but when we do, we have very few voting reps. So
I feel like we vote the whole time. No? I feel like we do that I mean,
plus one
people, like,
consensus, I think, is
regular
different
basis.
than a vote.
Oh yeah, no, sure, absolutely. No, I mean, I was talking about elections, not like plus oneing people.
Yeah.
I feel like we have lots of elections compared to the importance of the roles.
Emily came off camera, so he has something to say.
Was going to say the same thing, that officially we vote very rarely. We do have vote-like sort of, we do have, I think, quite a few processes where we do seek consensus in various ways. But I'd be happy for us to effectively enlarge on the representation pool, effectively possibly get rid of the elections that we've been running.
I'm not sure I understand that. Get rid of the elections that we're running, because if I understand correctly, most of the elections that I think people are talking about are just like the CPC chair, the board, and then.
Sorry, I was thinking of the at-large project representative elections and the regular member representative elections.
And probably the board seats too, I assume.
Yeah.
What do you mean?
And just to be clear,
Wait,
like,
how could we get rid of the board seat elections?
I don't know. Could we?
We could roll dice.
Sorry, what?
Yeah, Sarah, we heard you for a second.
It was a joke. And it
Roll
wasn't very
dice.
good.
Yeah,
Yeah, we
Oh.
could roll dice.
it was a good one.
Yeah, draw
I mean,
straws.
so I just want to clarify one thing, which is that when I titled that issue "Clarify the Voting Process," I should have written "Clarify the Election Process," not the voting process, because yeah, everything else is consensus driven, and so like there's no point in clarifying that. Like we have agreement about this, and clarify was also probably not a very well chosen word, right? And so the idea really was that, I mean, when I opened this issue, the idea was two things. One was it felt like we were spending lots of time on actually like running elections. And thank you, Rich. That is actually very funny. Rich just wrote in the chat, please clarify the term clarify.
I'm visualizing a dice with all your faces on it, but anyhow, I digress.
So, yes, so do I, right? So anyway, there were two things. One was we were spending lots of time actually talking about setting up elections and then voting and then like having issues with how the votes had been done and redoing them and choosing what kind of voting process we were supposed to use. And it felt like for most of these roles, either there were not enough candidates for it to make sense, or, and that was my point for the board, and this is what I do for the advisory committee at AMP, by the way, it would make more sense to make decisions about who to elect on a consensus basis with a defined purpose in doing so, in my opinion, than electing people. So that was the position, and I know that's a strong position, and not everyone's going to agree with this, right? But that was my position on this topic. So yeah, I do think that unless there's like a legal obligation to like for the CPC to elect the board seat, that the CPC should do that with a strategy in mind. Like, what are we trying to achieve? Why do we want folks on the board? And what do we want them to do there? Rather than let's just 5 people show up and we just elect one without having a conversation about it.
Well, I think both can happen, right? We can figure out a strategy and goals and whatnot, but still have an election. So I think that that's valid. I would ask maybe, because I think the issue as it stands is not bad for dropping things like, oh, we should fix this for the election or this process or whatever. So I think that issue maybe can stand as it is. But I wonder if you want to create an issue or two for the 2 other things that you're talking about. I mean, I think, you know, it's a good question. Should we have a regular member voting members and at-large voting members? Should they be the same, you know, person or 2 people or whatever? You know, I'm open to kind of simplifying some of that structure. You know, we sort of overcomplicate a little bit at the outset to cover our bases. And I'll also say, Luke, if you want to get together and like look at election process and how things are set up, I think there are some things in this issue, and I think there are other improvements that we could make. We made some decisions based on some things that now don't really make as much sense. So we can kind of make things better, I think.
Sounds good. I'll book some time that we can do that.
Cool, that'd be great. All right, and Toby, if you're into it, drop a couple other issues in there. I think that's at least worth discussing and seeing what we figure out.
I'm happy to open issues. So you would want one about like what specifically?
Well, you said 2 things, right? I was just saying
About each of those?
Yeah.
And keep that one as an, okay, I get that. That works.
Yeah. And I can maybe take the agenda label off of this current one, and then Luke and I can kind of just go through them and try to clean some of that stuff up. Cool. Oh, this one, my favorite. Next on the agenda is issue 910. This is the patching script for the code of conduct updates. I see some recent comments. Does anybody want to update me or the group on these recent things here?
So Ben asked about what the status of this stuff was, because he's
Nice.
essentially blocked by like this thing. I think, and suggested, which I think is a good suggestion, which is the code of conduct, like the upstream version doesn't get updated that often. And doesn't make sense to set up a whole infrastructure to deal with this if it's to update the code of conduct on a really like a regular basis, and that we're blocking everything on the fact that no one's actually doing the engineering work to make that work. So yeah. I think that's a valid point.
Mike Samuel?
I think last working session I was in with Kearney, I think we did a little bit of engineering work. That doesn't mean that, its infrequency means that we need to finish that engineering work, but I think some progress has been made on that.
Yeah, it's true. And that's on my plate to finish that up. Tierney handed it off to me to finish putting it in place with the actions and stuff. Sarah?
I just, even listening to this, just throwing it out there, I wonder if engineering group working sessions would be nice. So everyone to get that work done too. Though I recognize that I didn't come to the last working group session where we were all getting things done. So I'm just throwing it out there.
Same here. And I was the one who suggested the last one and didn't show up. So, I think there's a pattern here, Sarah.
Lots of ideas, lots of ideas.
Yeah. What I guess on that topic, what do we want to do for a next working session? Is there something already scheduled? I can't recall. I'll try to look real quickly.
I think we bumped one because for the last one, let me see.
So
It's
November
pinned.
15th, yeah, it's build stronger ties between at-large maintainers and their CPC rep is what's listed currently. And I don't know if that's something we want to focus on next week, or if we want to have another working session, or what we want to do. Sarah, do you still have your hand up or no?
Nope, let me put it down.
Okay. Toby, then?
I actually think that cleaning stuff up at the end of the year and with Luke joining is just like a good thing to do. Actually, like it makes me feel better about like the whole org. So I would suggest doing that if there are no like super important discussion things coming up.
Yeah.
And I also think it sets like a good precedent of actually like doing work and getting together to do work rather than getting together to talk. So I think it's good. Yeah,
and I'll just add before I pass it to Emily that if we were to do that sort of a working session, I would try to do that patching script stuff while we were kind of talking about stuff and get stuff done. Emily?
That sounds like a better idea than what's currently on booked. But I mean, on that topic, I would be very happy about effectively having a discussion about disintermediating me from my role that I've had, I think currently do, as a at-large project representative by effectively doing kind of like what Toby suggested and getting rid of this role by making all at-large projects have a voting representative, because I think we can trust on the sort of interest level in actual participation here being sufficiently low that this would not actually block anything.
Yeah, I'm not necessarily opposed to that. Are you suggesting that any at-large project that wanted to have a voting member could have that option, essentially?
Yeah, have a conversation about, does that make sense? And what are the risks, rewards, and other concerns around that I don't think we've ever talked about, because I'm not sure if this has been raised, at least while the foundation has been beyond its bootstrapping, because in the bootstrapping, I presume it was figured out that the current structure made sense. But I think it would be a good time to have a conversation about, should we think about this again, given that we can now see how in practice it works with how many people participate and how they participate in the CPC.
Yeah. Toby?
We just decided not to have this conversation next week because it's not worth it. And now we're not going to have it today. I mean, that doesn't make sense, does it? It's an important conversation, but like, no?
I was kind of saying it is, I think it would be good for us to have this conversation, but the other stuff is more urgent to get done next week, as it sounded like there might be some actual movement in that direction. Whereas this conversation is one that would probably benefit from a little bit more time and some asynchronous communication before we talk about it necessarily live.
Yeah, I mean, what about just an issue and getting that conversation started asynchronously there? Because I think it's a good idea.
That sounds good. Have I volunteered myself for that, or Toby, are you going to take care of it?
I mean, this is an issue about governance in general. I mean, like the two issues I'm actually in about to open now touch on this topic too, essentially. So let's like widen this a little bit and have a conversation about reorganizing like the governance of the small projects in the CPC and in the board and seeing how that goes.
Reorganizing.
You add the word simplifying.
Review. Review, because we may well end up deciding that, hey, what we got is fine.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Review.
I'm going to clarify, like how I'm going to write the issue title before I actually do.
And add the word simplify too, even if we keep it the same. Just might need a little wordsmith.
Michael?
I guess I don't want to get into the details of this, but the question of like having additional voting members, it's like, we don't have anybody from any of those projects could already show up and be very active in the CPC. So I'm just wondering if, like, is it going to make any difference to say you can have a voting member versus you can just show up and participate? And as been mentioned, we don't vote on that many things. So if people from the projects aren't coming now, is that actually going to change anything?
Yeah. Emily?
Probably not, which is why I was suggesting that we could do it without, affecting any real harm, but get rid of a stage of bureaucracy that we currently have of needing to vote for people in the role that I currently have, which I figure, we could just be like, not. But let's have, I think we need to, each of us consider this maybe a little bit and then have a more focused governance review discussion, because I think there are viewpoints that we share or diverge on here that we ought to explore at some point here.
Okay, so in terms of next week's working session, should we have sort of a general working session, or should we, review governance? What are people's thoughts?
I would say that if there's a hope of getting the COC or other stuff unblocked, then that would be really good, because that's been on us for ages, and doing something else kind of feels like, let's do this other thing because that's new and sexy rather than this thing we really ought to get done.
All right, cool. So let's do that.
When are the next elections?
That's a good question. I'd have to look at the doc. I think, April or something.
Yeah, spring, summer-ish, like early summer.
Are you sure? Because it used to be
it was
all the
when
time.
Cahill was here, and he was here in May.
But don't we have
June.
them like offset by 6 months or some other sort of like
The CPC
weakness?
chair is, so director 1 is February 28th, the primary director. And then the CPC chair is April 30th. Director 2 is July 31st.
See, I told you all the time.
That's not all the time. Come on.
I mean, when we meet every other week, if we have an election every 6 weeks, it's literally.
So let me be clear. We have 3 elections, 3 election times. We have the CPC chair, we have the primary board director, and then we have a few at one time. It's all in this dates and reminders doc.
And we don't have a secondary director too?
Yeah, but that happens at the same time as the other things. Now I lost my page. Where did it go? Here it is. So the secondary director, as well as the CPC impact voting member selection and the CPC non-impact voting member election, all three of those happen on July 31st. Their terms end July 31st.
Okay, so why don't we have the governance conversation before the February stuff? Enough before that we have time to resolve this, and then we're good.
Yeah, that seems fair. But I'm happy to have that conversation sooner than later too. So, let's push off. I mean, the building stronger ties between at-large maintainers and the CPC rep, that might even be moot if we're kind of, moving away from that. But I'm getting the impression that next week we'll do a working session, and then the week after that we'll potentially look at governance and or bump it if we find something else more important. Does that seem right? All right. I'm gonna just get rid of this one. Sorry, I'm gonna do this real quickly so it's done. So next week is working session, and then review governance, representation. All right, great. So I'm updating that. Cool. Anything else before I move on? Michael, you still got your hand up? No problem.
Just forgot to not put it down.
Yep. Cool. I'm going to move on. Next up is OpenJS World 2023 planning. This is issue 908. Anything we want to talk about here?
I think we can close that. I think we know that we're going to join the Open Source Summit North America. We just need to get our program committee back on schedule, and yeah, we can close that.
Okay. Should we close it with any sort of closing comment, or should
I put it? What did I thought I did.
We are convening our OpenJS program committee this Thursday to finalize the proposal for OpenJS World 2023 at the Linux Foundation Open Source Summit North America.
Yeah.
All right.
I guess it wasn't super clear, but yeah, we are going to do the Open Source Summit North America.
Okay. I'm going to say we are going to do Open Source Summit. Okay. Should I say be a part of? We are going to be.
We're going to hold, the official word is a micro conference. There's conference, yeah.
Okay.
There's
Great.
two concepts now. There's a micro conference, which is under the same day as the Open Source Summit, or there's co-located summits, which are the day before, the day after. We're not going to do the colo. We're going to do the micro conference.
Okay, great. I close the issue with that comment. Excellent. Moving on. Update contributor comments.
Before that.
Oh, sorry.
Follow-on question to that. An OpenJS World in Europe, maybe in 24 or something, because
Yes,
it's
yeah.
been in
As soon
North
as they,
America a lot.
we will be doing
Where
that as
it's been-
well. We should probably add a note. It hasn't been announced yet, but we will do it. So.
I'm sorry. Can you
You
Robin,
said that it just seems North American centric, and so what about Europe? Yes, we will do Europe.
Cool. Yep. Great. Thank you.
That date
In
and
like-
location yeah.
23, 24 sometime? Or
2023.
ah,
I think what was mentioned is we can do both of them. Like
Yes,
there's
we can
one-
do
there's
both.
one-
Yes. So, yeah. So we should update. That is in the fall. I think I had mentioned offline or off camera, off YouTube last week, where it was going to be held, if you can remember, but it's not been publicly, bless you, not been publicly listed yet.
Okay. Cool. So more news coming on that.
Yeah.
Great. But we will do places other than North America.
Yes.
Yeah, and it gives us a good opportunity for like a collaborator summit, one in North
Mhm.
America, one in Europe each year too, which is good.
Mhm.
Yeah. All right, great. So moving on, pull request 851, the contributor covenant code of conduct. We kind of talked about this earlier. We're going to try to move forward on this next week, or even before then, try to get progress on this so it's unblocked. Last couple of issues here, license check support tooling. This is issue 815. I think we've got a waiting on staff update label. Thank you, Toby. And then I don't know if this is, I think last time, Robin, you said the team had spun up and it's going to be a little bit still.
The team, the LF IT team is looking to hire some more folks, but we're on the list hopefully for January to start building that.
Okay,
I
great.
should probably update that I'll update that in the issue.
Cool. Thank you.
Mhm.
Moving along. Next up is clarify requirements around COC code of conduct violation. This has been around for over a year. Where are we at on this? Is this, Toby, is this on your plate? Looking for what the last thing is.
It is. I do have a question though.
Okay.
We had a session on COC about a week ago, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not sure if we still want to make the changes that were planned now, or do we wait on whatever conversations we're having now to batch all those changes together? This is a very lame excuse on my part. I will admit it. Absolutely.
I mean,
Robin, this was a question to Robin, actually. What are your thoughts about this?
I think we could probably do incremental, like we talked about.
Okay, that's fine.
Changing at least the representation so people know who we are and how to find us. And it's not a list of 20 people or potential mystery people. Yeah.
So I'll follow up on that, and then we can take whatever we did last time. Yes. Okay, makes sense. Good.
Yeah.
I tried.
We won't boil the ocean on this one. We'll just, because we had some clear action items. I have my notes document too and can help on that. So
is there, just in terms of tracking, is there an issue for the work that needs to be done from that last meeting, Robin? Do we know? Should we have one, or should it just happen and we're good? Or
out of the other, would it fall under the other COC issues?
I don't know if it would. I like specific
I don't think
issues.
Yeah.
I do too. Okay, that's fine.
So
We
even
can
if it's
open an
just like update, COC,
Yeah.
that would be
Yeah.
great.
Okay.
Great. Thank you. Great. Last one on the agenda here is issue 664, code of conduct missing for a number of projects in the projects table in the README. Oh wow, so did somebody add this? Toby added this a week ago, and I agree. I'm glad that you did. So we should be updating that table that's in the README. Pulling this up here. Yeah, a lot of them have it, but not all of them. So we should it would be good to have those in there. I agree.
Wait, hold on. I'm trying to figure out. Yeah, I was just. Yeah, the point I wanted to make here about this was that we already have a list in the COC itself of which project has their own process. And so I'm not exactly sure what we want to do with this. I mean, the whole idea is that we have one COC for the whole organization anyway. So what are we, are we tracking that the projects are like pointing to the COC using that? Like I'm confused as to why we have sort of like two sources of truth. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, my thinking about this table is so if somebody's like, I don't know where their code of conduct is, and they could easily find it here. But I agree.
But shouldn't they go to the foundations one anyway? I mean, isn't the agreement that we all use the same COC?
Is it required?
I mean, at least to onboard a project, it is.
The COC often includes details like reporting pathways and so on, and those are possibly maybe project first and then only later escalated to the CPC level or foundation level.
Well, I know, because the main COC that we have actually lists for every project whether they have to call, like the specific email for that project, or if it's a foundation one.
I see. In our code of conduct, I got it. Took me a minute to find it.
So I mean, like, what I think is bad is if we start to have like a whole bunch of different ways to report an issue, and that they're not synchronized and they're inconsistent. Because that's like the worst possible outcome, right? It's like you email folks, it's the wrong email, like nothing happens for like 3 days.
Yeah.
I would welcome being forced to do the right thing. We've had a lot of discussions in Node particularly, but I'm sure other projects as well, about what should the reporting mechanism be? What's the code of conduct? Those are important discussions to have, but it would be wonderful if the foundation had requirements that just made it easy to do the right thing, because you just do what the foundation instructs.
Yep. Emily?
This kind of sounds like the same thing as it's not really enough for you to say that my code is Apache 2 license. You've also got to include the license with your code.
Toby?
Yeah, no, I think simplifying is good. I think that what we had in place in projects was a redirect. So like it's important to have a code of conduct in the right place, but it just points to the main one. And my understanding is like we have like agreement that's how it's supposed to be. Like, I mean, when I moved when I did the work to move the AMP project to the foundation, like a number of years ago at this point, like there was a whole bunch of requirements around this. Like that was discussed in the CPC meetings, and like those conversations where, I mean, that was something that people were quite serious about us doing the right way. So like, we did a whole bunch of work to make that like the right way. And so I'm very surprised that suddenly like this is actually not something that like is an applied policy. And like,
So
sorry.
I think I mentioned last year, I did an inventory of everybody's code of conduct, but then I found all kinds of other things from missing privacy notices, and even though we have footers and things like that. I think during the merger, there were still some projects that didn't finish their onboarding during the merger to bring themselves up to that requirement. So I know that the team, I think, was whittling through that, but there's still quite a few projects who need updates. Sometimes those updates are harder to make because their websites might be fragile and adding new things are a little more difficult, but at least on their GitHub page, it should be quite clear and easy to find. I even found, even if they had one and it's the right one, sometimes it's really hard for somebody to find.
I think specifically about this issue, and I think what Toby talked about at the beginning of discussing this issue, we do have the table which links to everybody's code of conduct, which should, in theory, have reporting directions. So having this other list of, email this person for this project, I think doesn't make sense. And we should perhaps update that part of our code of conduct to reference the table of projects on the README or something, because that is going to get out of sync for sure. And then that'll be a problem. Michael?
Yeah, I was just going to clarify to Toby's comment. Like, I don't think there's any less requirement, or, our governance is you're required to have a code of conduct, and we have requirements around it. the separate part of enforcement requires people to go around and do checks. And so that part I might agree we haven't been on top of, but it doesn't change the fact that we have the requirements. So
Yeah, I just couldn't remember
don't
the-
be like, hey, we did this for nothing, because just because you're doing the right thing doesn't mean you shouldn't.
Oh, I did not mean that at all. I think this is important. My point was, this is something that we had clear agreement about when I was in the position to have to follow whatever the process was. And so my point wasn't to say that other folks are not following the process. It was to answer the question of like, how we're supposed to handle this. Like, there is a process. Like, that was my point. Like, we have agreement around this. The fact that like it hasn't been applied across the room for a whole bunch of historical reasons that are completely sound, that is absolutely understandable and okay. But it doesn't mean that we don't have agreement as to what it is that we're supposed to do.
Correct. Okay.
And I do want to point out that this is a conversation that we've already had about like what is the source of truth, and that whether it should be the foundation COC, whether every project can have their own COC and then move, et cetera, et cetera. Rich, you have a point. Anyway, I'll just shut up.
Emily?
I think this is connected with the issue that we have of never having defined or implemented the annual project review process, which we're supposed to have.
Yep, agreed. All right. Well, there's a little bit of work to do there. I mean, the review process, there's a lot of work to do. But in terms of this specific issue, I think it would be good to update that table and then maybe point the code of conduct appropriately to the table in terms of who you reach out to and the process. Rich raises a good point. We've only got a few minutes left. This is actually the last issue in the agenda, but I did want to just point out Ben had created an issue for repos and suggested maybe using status badges for repos. I don't know if anybody has any thoughts about that.
Why don't we clean those up next week?
Sounds like a good idea. Okay. Cool. Maybe I'll amend that line item in the dates for next week. I'll add a couple of issues, this one and a couple other things. So getting back to the previous conversation, Toby.
No, I no, let's not have this conversation now. I'm gonna put that in the issue. I just wanted to.
Yeah. All right, cool.
Yeah, I'm +1 on that, Toby, but yeah. Okay.
Yep.
More to do. Lots to do.
Yeah, lots to do. All right, great. Good meeting, everybody. I appreciate you all coming. Does anybody have anything else we want to talk about in the last 2 to 3 minutes? Oh, I see Igis has your hand up.
Yeah, hi. So I'm quite new. Just before we close, I just wanted to introduce myself. And so I'm one of the new collaborators on Node.js. I'm working on the performance stuff mostly, but I want to take more responsibility on the OpenJS Foundation. So if you have anything that, if you need any help where I can contribute and give back to the community, I'm always happy to do it and just give you a heads up.
Great. Thank you. Welcome for sure.
Yeah.
And,
Welcome to the team.
Yeah, awesome to have.
are you on the OpenJS Slack?
Yes, I am.
Great. I will probably ping you soon. And
Perfect. I will be happy to answer.
Great. Thank you. Cool. Anything else before we wrap? All right. Well, we'll call it a day. Thanks, everybody. Great session. Talk to you all soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.